She told me, "You owe my dad an apology." I said, "No, I owe myself respect." I walked away, and she came back begging for a second chance. I am 35 now, but the story I am about to share happened just a few years ago when I was 34, living in a small town in Ohio. At that time, I was in a relationship with a woman named Sarah, and we had been dating for almost 2 years. Things were getting quite serious between us. Serious enough that we were talking about marriage, shared futures, and building a life together. I honestly believed she could be the one. Sarah and I met in a pretty ordinary way. A friend introduced us at a gathering, and what started as small talk grew into something bigger. She had a smile that drew people in and a personality that could light up a room. She was confident, outgoing, and always had a way of making herself the center of attention without even trying too hard. I was different, calmer, quieter, more reserved. Where she was loud, I was reflective. Where she was flashy, I was subtle. Yet somehow we balanced each other, or at least I thought we did. In the beginning, everything felt smooth. We went on trips together, tried out new restaurants, and she introduced me to a side of life that was faster and louder than what I was used to. I adapted to her world because I loved her, and I believed love meant compromise. My friends would sometimes joke that I was letting her lead too much, but I ignored those comments because I believed what we had was special. After nearly 2 years together, I started meeting her family more regularly. Her mother was polite, kind enough, though a little cold at times. But her father, that was a different story altogether. From the very first meeting, I could feel a wall between us. He was a hard man to read, with a sharp tongue and a tendency to look down on people. He had a way of making every conversation about his achievements or his opinions, and if you disagreed, he would laugh like you were a fool. At first, I brushed it off as him being protective of his daughter. After all, many fathers are tough on the men their daughters date. I tried to be respectful, polite, and patient. I made an effort to get along, even when he said things that rubbed me the wrong way. But no matter what I did, it seemed like nothing was ever good enough for him. If I mentioned my career, he would downplay it. If I spoke about my interests, he would mock them. The tension reached a breaking point one evening during a family dinner at their house. We were all seated around the table. Sarah, her parents, and me. Conversation started out light, talking about work, vacations, and random family stories. But then, somehow, the topic shifted to my family. Now, for context, my mother passed away several years ago, and her memory is something very personal and sacred to me. She was a single mother who worked hard to raise me, sacrificing so much so that I could build a decent life. Losing her was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through, and even now, years later, talking about her still brings a mix of pain and respect. That night at dinner, Sarah's father made a comment that crossed a line I could never ignore. With a smirk on his face, he said something along the lines of, "Well, it's no wonder you turned out so ordinary, growing up without a real father, and with a mother who probably didn't know much about raising a man. What else could anyone expect?" The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze. For a few seconds, I didn't even know how to react. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and her mother looked down at her plate. Nobody said anything, and that silence made his words echo even louder in my head. I took a breath and tried to stay calm, but inside, I was boiling. I managed to say, "With all due respect, my mother worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She did more for me than you could possibly imagine." He just chuckled and waved his hand like my words didn't matter. "Relax, son. It's just a joke," he said, as if belittling my late mother was something funny or acceptable. After that, the dinner felt like a blur. I went quiet. I barely touched my food. I just wanted to leave. When it was finally over, I drove Sarah and myself home in silence. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. When we got back to my place, I expected her to say something comforting, to tell me she was sorry for her father's behavior, to acknowledge that what he said was wrong. Instead, Sarah turned to me with a serious look on her face and said the words that changed everything. "You owe my dad an apology." I stared at her, thinking I had misheard. What did you just say? I asked. You owe my dad an apology, she repeated, her tone firm. He was just joking, and you made it awkward by taking it so personally. You should apologize to him so this doesn't become a bigger issue. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I could feel a heat rising in my chest, but my voice came out calm, steady, and clear. I looked at her and said, No, I don't owe your dad an apology. I owe myself respect. The silence after that was deafening. She opened her mouth to argue, but I was already standing up. I didn't want to hear another excuse for disrespect. I didn't want to sit there and let someone tell me to betray my own mother's memory just to keep the peace. So I walked away. I walked away from her, from the relationship, from everything we had built over the past 2 years. It wasn't easy. I loved Sarah, or at least I loved the version of her I thought was real. But at that moment, I realized that love without respect means nothing. If she couldn't stand beside me when her father insulted my mother, then what kind of partner would she be in the future? Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I focused on myself, my work, and my friends. Slowly, the pain began to fade. I still thought about her sometimes, but each time I remembered that night, I reminded myself that walking away was the only choice I could have made. And then, out of the blue, she came back. It started with texts, messages saying she missed me, calls that I didn't answer. Then one day, she showed up at my door. She looked different. Tired, stressed, not as put together as she usually was. She broke down and admitted that she had been wrong, that she should have stood up for me, that she should never have asked me to apologize for something that wasn't my fault. She said she wanted another chance. She said she regretted everything. She said she was begging me to take her back. But by then, something in me had changed. The part of me that once believed in her had died that night when she chose silence over support, when she chose her father's pride over my dignity. I listened to her words. I saw the tears rolling down her face, but I felt nothing but a calm resolve. I told her that respect is not something you can lose and then ask for back later. I told her that I deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. But by that time, the damage was already done, and the respect I once had for both Sarah and her family had been completely shattered. She did try to come back later, sending me messages filled with apologies, claiming that she had realized her mistake and that she was begging for me to forgive her. She said she wanted to make things right, that she wanted another chance to fix everything between us. But deep inside my heart, I knew that some lines, once crossed, could never truly be repaired. I remember reading her words on my phone, seeing the desperation behind every message she sent, and for a brief moment, a part of me wondered if I should give her the opportunity she was asking for. But then, just as quickly, I thought back to that moment in the living room. Her father's words, sharp and cruel, piercing me in the deepest way by mocking my mother, who was no longer with me. And I remembered how Sarah looked me in the eye, knowing what those words meant to me, and still told me that I owed him an apology. That memory burned in my mind like a fire that could not be put out. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about dignity, about self-respect, about knowing that I deserved to be with someone who would stand beside me, not against me. And the truth was clear. If she couldn't stand up for me in that moment, if she couldn't see how deeply her father's words cut into me, then she wasn't someone I could build a future with. So I didn't answer her calls. I didn't reply to her messages. I let the silence be my answer. She wanted me to return to the place where I had felt small, where my pain was dismissed, where respect was asked of me while none was given in return. But I couldn't go back there. I wouldn't go back there. In time, her messages became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped altogether. And though there was a part of me that felt sad about the way things ended, there was also a stronger part of me that felt free. I had walked away from something that was never truly going to value me, and I had chosen myself instead. And that was the most important decision I could have made. Even now, years later, I can still hear her words echoing in my mind. You owe my dad an apology. And just as strongly, I can still hear my own voice, calm and firm, replying, No, I owe myself respect. That moment defined everything that came after. Because in that moment, I realized that respect for myself was worth more than any relationship, more than any apology, more than any plea for forgiveness that came after. And so, when she finally came back begging for a second chance, I knew that the answer had to be no. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of respect, for myself, for my mother's memory, and for the man I chose to be moving forward.